This is a quick tutorial on how to code the Brood War AI to do the extractor trick. The reason why a tutorial for this is needed for something seemingly simple is because of Brood War's nature on how it treats Zerg units or buildings morphing. So the summary of it is that it takes 2 frames for the extractor object to appear in the game, where the geyser first needs to get destroyed, then an extractor becomes created. And alongside this, as a side note, Zerg eggs also have some funky behaviors as well. But anyway, for now, let's focus on the goal of this video and sum up on the previous tutorial videos so far. So number 1, the code will drone up to 9 in-game supply or 18 actual supply. Then 2, the AI will drone up and produce overlord. And then number 3, the code will build a spawning pool. So what this tutorial will append to this logic after the 3 mentioned steps are carried out, it will do the extractor trick while the overlord production is in progress. So it will be between the steps 2 and 3. Okay, so let's start by creating a function under public, and let's call this extractor trick, and let's create an integer variable. Let's also call this extractor trick. Let's start with 0, and this is essentially the goal of this is to keep track of the extractor trick progress, and this is just a function for the extractor trick. Okay, so that's done. So just to help out the mental, let's just build a mental framework of how we're going to do this to help us code, to keep the logic in our heads while we're coding. So I will start with a pseudocode here. Pseudocode, great. Okay, so somehow if some conditions are met, then builder builds the extractor, right? Then the variable extractor trick advances to 1. So yes, the progress of the extractor trick advances. It progresses forward. So let's just keep this in mind. And I have not mentioned this before in my previous tutorial yet, I think. But this draw text screen is very helpful. Actually, let's keep this one. Let's just replace hello world. And for this, we will call this extractor trick variable with the digit. And let's make sure it prints this out, this variable. So instead of saying hello world, it will now print out, oh, extractor trick, colon, some number, like 0, 1, 2, 3, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Now let's get to writing the function. Starter bot, extractor trick. And the function will go something like this. So, I think maybe this needs to be capitalized. Yes, okay. Great. So, continuing from the pseudocode logic that I wrote earlier, if extractor trick equals 1, so this is essentially saying when we give the order to build, then basically when we detect that the extractor trick is happening. So by this time, extractor trick equals 1. So for BWAPI unit, BWAPI Brood War self get units if the unit is extractor, then let's train a drone. So this is the next step in the extractor trick. Oh, let's change. Okay, great. So this is essentially saying, okay, as soon as we build the drone, or let me take a step back. If we detect that the extractor exists, though there are other ways to do this, this whole thing here, you can just use tools to count the number of extractors that the player owns. But anyway, if I have an extractor, that means that the supply will go down to 8 out of 9, right? Or in-game supply, which is like basically 16 out of 18 actual supply. When that happens, we can then create a drone. We can train a drone, which is back up to 9.9, and this will advance the extractor trick. We will progress forward. That's the logic here. Okay. Then let's is it okay? Yeah, I think that's about good. So next step is to run this new code on the next frame. So if extractor trick is 2. But let me just explain why this goes up here instead of going down here. Is because if extractor equals 2 and the code, it keeps running. Okay, it's equals to 2 and it will keep running. It will just keep going forward. But what we want is to run the next code to be run on the next frame. So that's why we're putting it above. So that when everything is done running, the frame will reset and the code will run from the top again. Oh, let's fix this. Actually, we want this larger than or equal to 2, and I'll explain a little bit later why. But anyway, so extractor trick. Let's increase the value of extractor trick variable by 1. So the reason why it's larger or equal to 2 is because we want to also increase the extractor trick variable by 1 when it's 3 or 4, etc., etc. Because, as I mentioned earlier, it takes 2 frames. Okay, then we get to the almost last part, which is, if extractor trick is larger than or equal to 4, then BWAPI unit u BWAPI brood war self get units if you get type. BWAPI unit types Zerg extractor. So essentially, okay, for all of my units, what's wrong here? Oh, get type, I think. Okay, great. Then we can cancel this extractor. For all the units that I own, if the unit I selected is extractor, then we can cancel the construction of the extractor and we can reset. Okay, so I believe that should be okay for now. Now we need to go all the way back to the pseudocode. Then let's actually make this thing. Okay, so let me think here. Okay, so let's start by saying, okay, what builds the extractor? We have to select a drone, right? But we don't want to explicitly tell drone, just for practice purposes. Let's just try to find out. Let the AI find out using BWAPI what causes, or should I say, what's the predecessor of the Zerg extractor. So for that, we can use BWAPI unit type builder type. Let's call this variable builder type. BWAPI unit types Zerg extractor. What builds first? So first and second is basically if you think of Python dictionary, first would be the key and second would be the value. So this is essentially a variable that's like a dictionary, this builder type. No, sorry, what builds. The output of what builds is like a dictionary. And essentially we're saying, okay, what builds the Zerg extractor? And we need, and the answer we'll give by this first, which will say Zerg drone. Okay, so the builder type will say Zerg drone. Okay, then the next part is let's have this new variable called builder. All right, so let's create this new variable called builder, and we get the unit type of this Zerg drone. So essentially saying the same thing twice, except here we try to find out what builds Zerg extractor, and which will say, okay, Zerg drone, and we get the unit type of that Zerg drone, which will be stored into the builder. So it's essentially Zerg drone. There's like a worker type. But anyway, enough on the details. Let's get into unit. Let's now find the closest geyser. So let me explain this after I write this. Builder, BWAPI, brood war, get geysers. Okay, so this is basically saying, okay, using the tools that comes with the starter bot, let's get the closest geyser from the builder. From all the geysers that are in the game, let's get the closest geyser from the builder. Okay, so now we have these three variables to work with, which means now we are ready to write this code. If closest geyser is a valid variable, if builder is a valid variable, and let's make sure that we have the right enough minerals. Let's just say for now 75. So let me explain why 75. So extractor costs 50 and a drone costs 50. So after building the extractor, you need to build a drone, which is a total of 100 minerals, right? So the reason why I write 75 here is because it takes a little bit of time for the drone to walk up to the extractor and morph into an extractor. And during that time, the minerals will be gathered up to 100. Of course, your mileage may vary, but in my experience, 75 has been a decent number to work with. If I put it down to 70, it starts to sometimes cancel a little too early, etc., etc. So let's just go with that for now. So, tools, count units of type, BWAPI unit types, Zerg extractor, BWAPI brood war, self, get units. Okay, so this is essentially saying how many counts of extractors do I own? So if I own 0 extractors, that's basically what it's saying. And let's make sure we have the right supply count. Supply used 18 or 9 in-game supply. Let's do something similar to total supply is also 9 in-game supply. Then count units of type, BWAPI unit types, Zerg spawning pool, BWAPI brood war self, get units, and let's make sure that we are currently making an overload, which is done from our previous tutorial. Okay, then finally, after meeting all these conditions, make sure that these two variables are valid, make sure we have a good amount of minerals, make sure that we're not repeating the same process by having another extractor. Though later in the game, I guess after you expand, you probably want to change this logic. Let's make sure that we have 9 out of 9 supply. Let's make sure that we don't have a spawning pool already. It could be a late game thing, I don't know. Maybe in the late game you don't want to have this process, extractor trick process. And we want to make sure that the overlord is making. That's when we want to do this extractor trick. So let's make sure to build this extractor. And where do we want to build it? We want to build it where the closest position is. Closest geyser position to the builder. And then let's extractor trick advance to the next stage of the extractor trick progress. And then the rest of the logic should flow from other parts. So if it equals 1, oops, I think it's below. Yes, it's here. So if it's 1, after when we give the order to build, then finally we can say, okay, we train a drone, the extractor is being made, supply 8 out of 9. I should write that down. Oops. Supply. Then we have bounce to the next stage, which is to wait at least 2 frames. Then we tell the extractor to cancel construction and reset the extractor trick progress. Okay, so now let's run this code. It's going to take a minute. All right, then let's run the StarCraft. Let's slow it down. Oh, extractor is not being cancelled. Okay, so extractor trick is 1. Okay, so let's debug this. Okay, so why is it not working? Aha! We created this function, but we're not running it. Okay. So we need to run this function, but we need to run this function before train additional workers. And to explain why, it's because we have this 8 out of 9 supply drone, and then it becomes 9 out of 9, right? And when that happens, we need to advance the extractor trick into the next stage at the same time. We need to have this variable advance. But if we just create the worker just normally, but does not advance the variable, which basically this is what that code does here, it will just skip over this. It will not be able to create another drone and advance to the next stage. That's why we need to run extractor trick code before training additional workers. Let's see if that works. Okay, generating code. Okay, let's slow it down a bit. Okay, now it's 9 out of 9. It should create an overlord. Great. Now it should do an extractor tick. Yes, it's 1, 2. Oh wow, that was really fast. Now it does extractor tick. It was 10 out of 9. Thanks for watching the tutorial.